While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Reaching out to the 50 million Christ followers in America that are already retired or are fast on their way to retirement, you've tuned into iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Boy, would we love to invite you to check out our website, retirementreformation.org, or our app, Retirement Reformation, or of course on all the social media channels, Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and I'll be joined today by Bruce Bruinsma, the founder of the Retirement Reformation, as we talk about when retirement plans unravel. Bruce, we've talked about making plans for retirement, which many of us have planned for 30 and 40 years about where we're going to retire and how we're going to retire and what we're going to do in our retirement and how will God influence our retirement. Then we've talked about when our plans just unravel and how do we react when things just don't go the way we planned on going. And then we talked about, what do we need to do when our plans unravel? We talked about peace and rest and just seeking the Lord, not reacting, not panicking, but letting God show us what's next after our plans unravel. Today, I really want to talk about starting over. What does it look like when our plans unravel and we have to go through that whole mourning process and start all over again? Bruce, I'm excited about today's conversation. Thanks for joining us again.
Well, I'm excited about it too, because the way God made me is I really two things that are characteristics of God. Number one, He's always looking forward. He's always a God of growth. And so those two pillars of who God is, as they're reflected in us, are going to help inform the conversation we're going to have today. And I'm excited about the conversation.
So we're talking about kind of replanning. We're kind of about restarting. It's everything's unraveled that we planned on. Now what does the Lord really have for us? What should be the steps that we take in building a plan for our retirement years?
Well, first of all, I think there's a couple of Bible verses that will help inform this. And there are two of the verses that we claim or that we use, that we engage with the Retirement Reformation. And the first is, of course, John 15:16, where Jesus says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you and I called you that you might bear fruit that will last. And whatever you ask in my Father's name, I will give you." So what a wonderful place to start in repackaging, rethinking, reintroducing, re-engaging with what God has for us. To know that we have the affirmation that He has chosen us to bear fruit. Not chosen us to play golf, but chosen us to bear fruit. And so what a wonderful affirmation that we can start with. Second is, those wonderful words from Romans 12:2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. And so when we put those two verses together as a place of beginning, if we have that foundation and that assurance, then in fact, the steps that we take, they will be part of God's plan and they will bring that meaning and purpose and the ability to impact God's kingdom. But let's take a look at that Romans 12:2 again, because new plans need to start with an acknowledgement that we are not to be conformed to the pattern of this world. I know that the next segment of podcasts that we're going to do are going to talk about this world and its culture. But here we are reminded not to be locked into what the world says, but to be open to where God is leading. That's the place we need to begin.
I love that verse in the New Living Translation. That's really a verse that has driven I work for him for so many years. It says, don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. And boy, is that appropriate when we talk about retirement in the United States of America, because we don't have it right in this culture. We have a retirement all wrong. So going back to that question, you said we need to go to the Bible, but what are some of those key components that we need to build into our plan for our retirement as we re-plan? For some people, they're actually going, wait, before my plans unravel, let's do this right. But some people are reacting and going, okay, plans did unravel. What are some of the things we need to consider in our retirement plan? And we're not talking just about money here.
For sure, we're not. Matter of fact, I think the beyond getting your thinking right, as we just talked about, the next step in that is to ask a question. And the question is, how has God prepared me for what is next? And so that understanding of who we are, or who God has helped us to be, and getting a really clear picture of that is helpful. A simple way to think about that is what is it that you are passionate about? Say, well, I don't know what that means. Mostly guys will say that. And the answer to the question is, when you see a story on TV, or you see a movie, or you read a book, or you hear about something, a story at church, or whatever it may be, what is it that makes you cry? So to be able to find out who God has created you to be in all of its characteristics. It's like a diamond, and it's been cut wonderfully, and so it reflects all these different pieces of you all at one time. And so to be able to understand what is the heart of that diamond and what are its pieces is foundational to understanding to what's next. If we're only thinking about, well, what would I be excited about? What would I do? No, you have to know where it is that you've come from in order to be able to understand where it is that God would have you go. So first was change your thinking. Second, understand where you came from.
Sometimes when I get doing all this planning stuff there, Bruce, I think you're kind of like me, but I'm going to speak for myself. I won't throw you under the bus with me. I forget to include God in my planning. I got a good idea. I run with it. I never stop to say, God, is this what you want? How do I make sure that I'm hearing God's voice in the midst of all this planning for my retirement years?
It's that question of how do I hear God's voice is such a foundational one. Or how do I know that an idea that I have, or a direction that I want to go, is really, part of God's plan. And so he's provided a series of ways for us to be able to affirm that. One of those ways is in fact the Bible. One of the ways is to be able to be totally connected with what he says is in this word. And that if it's anything that you're planning to do that is not in conformance with what he says there, find plan B. Second is that as you understand what he is saying here and you are applying that, it is always amazing to me from a early part of my Christian walk. I prayed for wisdom. And the reason I prayed for wisdom was because the key to my moving from a secular Christian to a faith-driven Christian was the book of Ecclesiastes. And you can tell that story another time, but the bottom line was when I finished reading for the first time the book of Ecclesiastes, and I realized that it was written by Solomon in his old age, when he was reflecting back. So here's the guy who was the richest guy, the smartest guy, most powerful guy. I mean, all whatever's.
The guy with the most wives.
The guy with the most wives, all of those problems. At the end of the story, when he said, it's all about God.
I've been reading that myself. Bruce, we got to take a break. We got a second segment where you always bring on a special guest. When we come back, I want to ask you this question. When you're doing this planning stuff, what happens if Judy hears something different than Bruce? You're listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. We'll be right back.
The Retirement Reformation wants to come alongside you as you navigate in each stage of your retirement. Our online resources include our blog, our downloadable books, and life planning studies, as well as membership and coaching options. Go to retirementreformation.org and use these resources to begin the transformation of your retirement. Journey from retirement to reformation, so you can say, I retire for Him. That's retirementreformation.org. Now, back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. Bruce, every second segment of our show, you always bring in an amazing guest. Why don't you introduce our guest for today?
Well, we have one more amazing guest, not only of what he has done, but I think will be really interesting to our listeners about the decision process that God has led him through and then a new direction that he's going. So, Chris, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You've had an unusual career, and so perhaps for the next minute or so, you might just kind of generally sketch that out to the degree you're comfortable doing it. And then let's talk about where you are right now and the decisions you and Nikki have made and the directions that God's taking you.
No, I'd be happy to. Yeah, so I, about 25 years ago, worked on and finished my doctorate degree in experimental social psychology, and then had grand plans to be a university professor. Then I realized that's not where I wanted to go, and that's not where God wanted me to go. And God sends us in places that may not seem so God-honoring or godly at times. And I went into the consulting field. It was a great opportunity. I've done that for about 20 years. And in that opportunity, I had the opportunity to build consultancies, to work with a lot of Fortune 500 brands around the world and just help them to understand their customers and what their customers were looking for. Fortunately, in that, I was able to also choose the types of clients that I got to work with. So I only worked with clients that I agreed with their position, generally speaking, from a Christian perspective. But then God was moving in my heart after leading a consultancy or being one of the partners in a consultancy. So I just quit. And that opportunity to quit was...
Wait a minute. You did not go through a long, laborious, heart-wrenching process? You mean you just quit?
It was a little laborious. It was probably more laborious afterwards, actually. Felt like I wasn't supposed to be there, left. And then honestly went into a little bit of freak-out mode, thinking, what have I done? Left this great career, high-paying job, EVP in an organization, so in a lot of control, being in charge, all the things that we think are great in life in terms of a human factor. And honestly, one of the pieces of the story, maybe I shouldn't share, but one night I'm laying in bed in the middle of the night, shivering from anxiety, and my wife says, God has a plan. And sure enough, the next day, I'm still freak out mode. This is about a 2-week period of freaking out and just wondering, what have I done? This is crazy. How do I provide for my family of 5 and what's that going to look like? She actually went and looked for jobs for me and found a job at Compassion International that was doing what I did as a consultant and being able to do research and measurement and help to understand the people that want to give, the evangelicals and Christians who want to give to Compassion. Applied for it. Compassion takes a long time in the hiring process. Had other jobs that were offered to me and told them no, and even told them no, and they said, we'll hold it for you. And I'm like, that's the God we serve. He knew my anxiety would be over the Christmas season if I didn't have a job, thinking I should just take this job. I was trying to be faithful. Went to Compassion, been there for about 5 years now. Have had the opportunity to go all over the world and to talk to Christians, talk to pastors all around the world, and just really understand how we can serve them better. And what does it look like to serve him? And then about 2 years ago, God started working on, he's been working on our heart for our entire marriage. But he really, we were taking a class called Perspectives and still travel, around the world. So I think I was in London for the last class, and the last class happened to be about teaching university. So Nikki calls me in London and says, "Hey, I think this is what God's calling us to do." And my wife also has her doctorate degree. And we prayed about it, and it's like, sure enough, it is. So now we have been on this journey for the last 2 years trying to wrap things up here in Colorado Springs and get the pieces taken care of. But then also just prepare, raising support, doing all of that, but also preparing with children going out on their own. And so now all of our children are out of the house and adults. It's time for us to move. It's time for us to go after that call that God's called us to in the Middle East.
Let's stop there for just a moment. So with our listeners, as I'm listening and appreciating all the different points of transition where decisions, God's leading, calling in different ways, whether you're freaking out or just taking the next step. But it's an ongoing process of God's preparation for the next stage. You are such a beautiful example of how he does that. Now, it may be different circumstances, it may be all different context, maybe a different ministry result in terms of kinds of ministry, but those points of decision and the willingness to step forward and take that next step to do what? So that in fact, as you listen to God's call, to make a difference that he has planned for you to make. So pick up the story from there and continue on.
Yeah, and I wish that I could say that I was always looking at God's call. I think we all probably wish that. But even when I wasn't, God was preparing in that consultancy role. I'm always the type of person, I don't ask why something bad happens. I'm more likely to ask, why does something good happen? Why would God bless my family with financial opportunity? And we're not tremendously wealthy by any means, but he's presented this opportunity to, I think, serve him and to glorify him. And what is that opportunity? How can we glorify him? And the more that we've gone on this path, my wife and I have always wanted to serve together in a deep and meaningful way. We've been looking for that for 20 plus years. And exactly what would that be? We've done different things in our local church and different ministries, but God has just continued to unfold and unfold and unfold his plan. Even to the extent that as recently as this week, we were trying to make the decision what to do with our home here as we leave. We're trying to think, can we bless somebody else by giving them a very affordable place to live in a very unaffordable place? And then God just opened the door yesterday for our house to sell. And I believe that part of that unfolding and part of God's plan is to not only prepare us and to give us that peace, but also so that we'll be ready when we're in the Middle East, if there's an opportunity to be able to serve him exactly how we need to serve him. As I said, we've raised support to go. This is a fully unfunded role. And that's great. But sometimes I think as a missionary, you get into that role and you don't have, something comes up and you're like, I don't have the resources to do that. I think God has prepared us with resource, not for our sake, but for his glory and for his kingdom. And so we're excited about being able to use that resource that is all his and to provide it in situations that we've prayerfully discerned and understand exactly how God wants us to use that resource to grow his kingdom, as well as the resource that he's given us in our brains as well. And that doctorate degree was one of my biggest whys in my life. I think a lot of people, when you go through that, it's like, oh, that must be great. The day after I graduated, I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? And it's like, why would I even have this? I'm from a blue collar family that nobody ever went to college before. And then all of a sudden I have this opportunity, and it's like, now 25 years later, that's how our God works. He works and He doesn't work in immediacy all the time. He can, and he does. But sometimes he works in a long period of time to be faithful and to show that faithfulness. And he wants to grow us. He needed to grow me. He sent me to compassion to grow a sense of humility. And it's like, wow, you sent me to a Christian ministry to deepen a sense of humility so that I can serve him and just be ready to go in whatever way, shape, or form today, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now, God willing.
You know, and as I read through my chronological Bible, I'm just at the point of where Joshua and the Israelites were finally in the promised land. And so, you can't help but be aware of all of the preparation, the pain, the sorrow, all the things that happened. And I was just reading, it was just a couple of days ago, I had always wondered, when did the manna stop? God prepared, for 40 years, he gave them manna, their shoes didn't wear out, and so on and so forth. When did the manna stop? And when the manna stopped was when they were now in a position to be able to use the resources of the land that God had given them in order to continue with their quote unquote ministry. And I see a total parallel here. So it would be my hope and prayer that one of the takeaways from our conversation today to those that are listening is that it's an ongoing unfolding of God's grace.
Yeah, that's right. Chris Radcliffe talking about his story of how he and his wife are preparing for going on a new adventure in the Middle East. And Bruce, I'll let you pick it up from here because there's some parts to Chris's story that I think all of us can learn from. He's like burning the ships, isn't he?
He sure is. Chris, good to have you back with us. And I just kind of like to pick up the story a little bit from where it is that we left off last time. The way that God had prepared you in some fairly unusual and different ways to be able to make this transition for you and Nikki. Your family's ready to go. All that preparation is done. And now you're going to literally make that move to Iraq. When you and I were chatting the other day, you said to me, Bruce, I'm selling everything. That created a momentary pause in my brain. What do you mean you're selling everything? Why in the world are you doing that? And what is the benefit and how is God leading you to that? That's going to make a difference when you're ministering in Iraq.
Yeah, no, it was a long prayerful decision. And from a human perspective, my human perspective is, well, no, I want to keep her home. I want to be able to come back here. Oh, we can rent it. There's going to be, we can build assets from that perspective. But then through prayer, my wife and I, Nikki and I, were just moved to say, no, that's something that will hold us back. That's something that will be an encumbrance, something that we'll have to think about. We'll have to have somebody to take care of the property 7,000 miles away. Other things that we have, it's like those things are things that hold us down. They become a weight. And we could feel that weight. And even we had done some preparation even before. We had started selling things and reducing what we had and just getting rid of stuff. And you could feel that weight start to lift. And then, but still, I wanted some of that weight to hold me down.
But that's an important phrase.
It sure is.
We could feel the weight starting to lift. Wow.
Yeah. And we, with that lifting, it's like there was still, that human desire. It's like, no, we still need this. We still want this. I think obviously it's much more of a want than a need. And, even, as we continue to decrease and to get rid of and to prepare to go, just again, that weight just continued to lift. And then really through prayer, we saw that, is this how God is preparing for what's going to happen? I sometimes jokingly think, I wish that I knew what God's plan was. I really don't. I know that I don't need to know that, nor do I want to know that, because it would probably scare me at times. But knowing that now we have this resource. We have God's resource to serve him in the way that he's called us to serve him, and to have the flexibility, because that's what that resource is for. It gives us margin. And that margin that it gives us actually will allow us to, when we hear the call, when God says, do exactly this, and it's like, from a worldly perspective, that's crazy. You mean it's going to take, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars for the resource? God's already provided. And God will provide even more. And I think through that faithfulness and that faithfulness of giving away and getting rid of, we can see that faithfulness even more in how God continues to provide and continues to provide. And even allows us, I think, hopefully at times, to be a blessing to others. We have friends who are supporting us to go on the mission field. It's like, hey, you need this. We have it. Just take it. And they're like, but you're going on the mission field. It's like, just remember what God's done at some other point, whether it be for us or for somebody else. And just remember what God's done, because it's all about him. And how do we redirect glory to him?
Well said. I was just reflecting on the names of three of the small books that I've written. One was called Finding Freedom. The next one was called Moving Forward. And the third one is called Charting Your Course. And so that has just actually been the pattern that God has taken you through a couple of different times, and now in such a dramatic way. So, Chris, we'll look forward to connecting with the ongoing story. Jim, you got a question?
Yeah, I do. Chris, a lot of people listening here are people that are looking towards retirement or already in retirement, and they're going, but I like my stuff. And God's asking you to give up your stuff so you've got the freedom to go do what he's called you to do. And he's used this release to get the release of the burden from you. Because the more stuff we have, it owns us. But what kind of advice can you give people as they're trying to make a decision about how they can make a difference in their retirement? What kind of advice can you give people as you and your bride, Nikki, have just held open hands and said, okay, God, whatever you want to do with us, we've got doctorates, which, praise God, it was you that he asked to give a doctorate, not me get a doctorate. We've got these doctorates. We've got this passion. Lord, how can you use us? We're willing to give up everything. What kind of advice can you give to other pre-retirees or retirees as they're going, I want to make a difference?
I would just say simply, giving back to God, you can't outgive him. You're never going to give away so much that he doesn't give you something that's more meaningful and more deep than your stuff. And that's one of the things I think in our world, in the Western world in particular, we let our stuff hold us down. And so, but if you give it away, God is faithful to replace it. And just like in one of my favorite parts of Job is a story of misery and suffering, but at the end of Job, God replaces everything twofold, because that's the faithful God that we serve. And his faithfulness is always true.
It is indeed. With that, thanks, Chris. God bless your travels. God bless your ministry. And we'll look forward to the next point of transition in the story, because there always is the next one.
Yes.
So thanks for making a difference. God bless.
And thanks,
Thank you,
Chris.
gentlemen.
Thanks for Chris for being on iRetire4Him. We'll be right back with more with Bruce Brynsma.
It's time we stop looking at our retirement years as 30 years of vacation, leisure, and self-gratification. Let's take control of our retirement life plan and build meaning, purpose, and intentionality into it. Go to retirementreformation.org and click on the word manifesto. We invite you to make a retirement declaration to yourself and to God. Sign the manifesto and start changing the way you think about retirement. Retirementreformation.org. Click on Manifesto. Journey from retirement to reformation, so you can say, I retire for him. Now let's get back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. Bruce, I promised our listeners that I would ask you this question. As we're talking about planning, as we're talking about listening to God's voice, what if Judy, your bride of almost 60 years, what if she hears something different than you during this planning process. How do you resolve that?
Well,
I'm sure it's never happened. I mean, I'm sure it's never happened. Hang on. I'm sure it's never happened. But if it were to happen, what do you do?
Yeah. Just a reminder, we know that we got to get our thinking straight. We know that we need to be connected to what the Bible says. And the third step in that process is the people that God puts in your life to be able to bring you perspective. The perspectives that people bring may not always be the correct perspective, but whenever there is someone like Judy, so we're out for breakfast on Saturday morning, and I'm saying, hey, Jude, listen, here's what I'm thinking. And this is the time when we're able to just talk and so on and say, well, I'm thinking this. And she gets that kind of look on her face, which I know only too well. And she says, well, and then shares with me whatever her concern is. One of the things that I've learned is that, number one, I need to listen, because God often will speak through her to me and bring up a perspective or a subject or a way to look at something that I had not even considered. And so often it is in that arena. It's not an argument about, should you do this or should you not do that? But have we tested what we're feeling or hearing against God's will, and seeing, is it wise? Does it fit in with his word? And does it fit in with there? Now Judy's going to approach it not as analytically as I do. And so I have to listen carefully to what she says. But good Christian friends of 60 years or more, as they speak into your life, it's critically important to listen and then test that against what else it is that God is saying.
I'm not quite sure you really answered that question. I loved you. You got spiritual. You gave me a Sunday school answer on that one, but I want to know, real deal. You got a plan and you share it with Judy, and she goes, I don't think so, Bruce. What do you do? Because in my mind, I've only been married, a little more than half as many years as you have, but it's either you're both wrong, one of you is right. That's the solution, because it can't both be right, because God doesn't say two different things to two different people. So either
here's the answer to that question in another way, from another Sunday school class.
Okay.
It is that I would not move forward with that plan until we had resolved it, and resolved the answer to her question, not who wins and who loses, but whatever the issue it is that she brought up, that issue needs to be resolved and resolved between us before I'm going to move forward.
So you make sure you both have the same answer before you move forward.
That's right.
And that's a great answer. All right. The Retirement Reformation was formed just for retirees to seek our Heavenly Father in the planning and execution of that final section of our life, however long it may be, but 20, 30, 40 years. What can we do to help our listeners go through this planning process? When their retirement lives have been reset by circumstances, what can we do to help? What do we do? What kind of resources do we have on our website, retirementreformation.org?
A new resource that's coming that will be helpful, and there's a whole bunch of them that are there now, everything from prayer guides and all kinds of resources. But the one that I'm really excited about is something called Rethink Retirement. And it's to be able to go through a process in community, not by ourselves, but in community, to go through a process that is individual in its nature, but to be supported by the church, by the community, to go through an 11-week process of understanding God's principles, understanding us individually, and then being able to move into the development of an actual plan with action steps that go along it. I'm excited about teaching that, excited about leading that, and others who will lead it also. I think that's going to be just wonderful. And the thing that's different about it is the idea of being able to do it in community, so that when you can listen to what others are saying, what others are experiencing, or they can speak into the issue that's got you hung up, or that you don't understand, or that you're revolting against, or that you want to deny is even true, but to be able to do it in community. And so I think the whole idea of being able to move forward together in community is a really wonderful next step.
Rethink Retirement. So that'll be a resource they'll be able to get under a free membership or under a paid membership on retirementreformation.org.
Oh, that will be part of a group program.
Okay.
And so there will be a cost to do that.
Okay.
Nominal as it will be, but it will be an opportunity to come together because it's not something designed to be done all by yourself.
Got it.
It's designed to be done in community with a group.
Which is where we do our best work. When we do our best work in community, which is what Christ described for us, when we are the most powerful, and the Holy Spirit moves most powerfully when we do it in community. Bruce Bryan's a great conversation. This whole series of what do we do when our retirement plan unravels has been powerful. We've heard some great stories, but really just we need to be prepared. Life is going to throw some curveballs at us when we're expecting a changeup or maybe even a fastball. And for those of you that don't know baseball, just roll with me here. We need to be ready, but really the biggest thing is just to be listening and to be willing to just be quiet, be at peace and rest to hear what God's got next for us, because God has a plan for you. He knows the days of your life. He has them numbered from the very first to the very last. Don't waste any of them. He's got some great stuff ahead of you. Bruce, thank you so much for being on I Retire for Him today.
Always good to be part of it, and this series has been special. So for those who maybe just picked this up at the end, go back and listen to all four. I think it will be impactful for you. And you may have others who you can refer to who need the messages that God has allowed us to bring through this series.
You've been listening to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, we've been joined by our host and our founder of the Retirement Reformation. We're Christ followers, just journeying along from retirement to reformation. So ultimately, we can say, I retire for Him.
Retire for Him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him with your hosts Jim and Martha Brangenberg and Retirement Reformation founder Bruce Brynsma. I Retire for Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.